Sleep now, my child, the river flows softly. Sleep now, little one, the river flows softly by.
The town rested beside the river like an old scar that never healed. From a distance, it looked peaceful, small houses with tired roofs, narrow paths worn smooth by years of footsteps, and trees that leaned toward the water as if listening. But those who lived there knew better. Silence ruled this place, not because nothing happened, but because too much had happened long ago. The river was everything to the town. It gave water for crops, fish for food, and a path for trade. Children once laughed along its banks, and elders once prayed beside it. Yet fear flowed through it as strongly as life. People spoke of the river in careful tones, lowering their voices when they mentioned it, as if it could hear its name. The elders believed the river was older than memory. Older than the town itself. They said it watched people come and go, generation after generation, carrying their joys and sorrows within its depths. The river did not forget. It remembered pain the way the land remembers fire, quietly, deeply, and forever. There were stories, half-told and quickly buried. Stories of nights when the river rose without rain. Of voices mistaken for wind. Of losses explained away as accidents. Each time something strange happened, the town chose silence. Silence was easier than truth. Silence allowed people to sleep. Time passed, and the stories faded. Or so they believed. But the river never slept. At night, when the town lights dimmed and doors were locked, the water continued to move. It carried reflections of the moon and shadows of trees, but also something heavier, something unseen. Some claimed the river responded not to noise, but to feeling. That it stirred when sorrow was deep enough, when grief was left unspoken for too long. Most laughed at such ideas. Fear, they said, makes people imagine things. The past, they said, should stay buried. Yet the river kept flowing, patient and waiting. In recent weeks, unease had returned. Fishermen complained of strange stillness in the water. Animals refused to drink from certain spots along the bank. At night, the air felt thick, as if holding its breath. No one spoke openly about it, but everyone felt it. The weight of something old pressing against the present. The river was not angry. It was heavy with memory. Beneath its dark surface, where light could not reach, something stirred. Not awakened by sound, but by emotion. By love mixed with grief. By a sorrow passed down like an inheritance. Whatever rested there had been waiting for a very long time. Waiting for a voice brave enough, or broken enough, to call it back to the surface. And somewhere in the town, a mother was about to sing. The mother lived at the edge of the town, where the houses thinned and the sound of the river grew clearer at night. Her home was small but clean, built with care and quiet effort. Inside, everything spoke of patience, folded clothes, swept floors, a lamp that burned low to save oil. She had learned to live gently, as if too much noise might break what little peace she had left. She was a woman shaped by love and loss. Her eyes carried tiredness that sleep could not cure, and her hands moved with the calm of someone who had learned to endure. Long ago, grief had found her and never fully left. She did not speak of it. In this town, people learned early that pain survived better in silence. Her child was the center of her world. Small, warm, and curious, the child followed her from room to room, holding the edge of her dress, asking quiet questions with bright eyes. When the child laughed, the mother felt a softness in her chest, a reminder that joy could still exist beside sorrow. When the child slept, the mother watched every breath, as if love alone could guard against fate. Each night, before the lamp was turned low, the mother sang. The lullaby was old. Older than her own mother, older than memory itself. It had been passed down through women whose names were no longer spoken. The tune was simple, almost plain, but the feeling behind it was deep and heavy. It was not a song meant to impress. It was a song meant to hold pain gently, the way hands hold something fragile. The child loved the lullaby. It brought comfort, wrapping the small body in calm. But what soothed the child stirred something in the mother. Each note pulled at her heart, awakening feelings she worked hard to keep buried. When she sang, she remembered faces she tried to forget. Moments she never allowed herself to name. Still, she sang. Love demanded it. The mother feared the river. She had since she was young. She avoided its banks and warned her child never to go near it alone. She spoke of it with care, teaching respect without explaining why. Fear without explanation was common here. It was how children were kept safe from questions adults could not answer. Sometimes, late at night, when the town slept and the wind shifted, the mother felt the river's presence even from her home. It felt close, like a breath against the skin. On those nights, she held her child tighter and sang softer, as if the lullaby could build a wall between them and the water. She never sang the lullaby near the river. Never. Not because anyone told her not to, but because something deep inside her refused. A warning passed through her blood, old and unspoken. She did not know where it came from, only that it was strong. The lullaby carried history, though she did not fully understand it. She knew only that it was tied to sadness, to nights when mothers needed strength more than sleep. It was a song born from longing, shaped by tears, and kept alive by love. As the days passed, the mother felt a growing weight. Life was hard. Food was scarce. Worry clung to her like dust. Some nights, exhaustion pressed so heavily on her chest that breathing felt like work. On those nights, she wondered if the lullaby was the only thing holding her together. She did not yet know that love, grief, and desperation can open doors long closed. And she did not yet know that the lullaby was listening, not just to her voice, but to her heart. It happened on a night when exhaustion defeated caution. The day had been long and heavy, filled with small struggles that stacked upon each other like stones on the chest. The child had cried more than usual, restless and uneasy, as if sensing something the mother could not see. When night fell, the air felt thick, pressing down on the town and its people. The mother carried her child outside, hoping the cool air might bring sleep. She walked farther than she meant to, her steps slow and tired, until the sound of moving water reached her ears. Only then did she realize how close she was to the river. She stopped. The river lay dark under the moonlight, wide and still in a way that felt unnatural. The surface barely moved, as if holding itself steady. The mother's heart tightened. Every lesson she had learned told her to turn back. But the child whimpered softly, clinging to her shoulder. She told herself it would be just for a moment. Just until the child slept. The river had never harmed her. Fear, she thought, had made her careful for no reason. She sat on a flat stone at the river's edge, keeping a careful distance from the water. Then she began to sing. The lullaby flowed from her without effort, shaped by years of repetition. Her voice was low and tired, but full. Each note carried love, worry, and a deep longing for rest. She sang not to the river, but to her child. To the life she was trying so hard to protect. At first, nothing happened. Then the wind shifted. It moved across the water in a slow, gentle sweep, sending small ripples outward. The air grew cooler. Leaves along the bank rustled though no breeze touched the trees behind her. Somewhere in the dark, an animal went silent. The mother felt it before she saw it. A strange awareness, like being watched without eyes. She kept singing, telling herself it was her imagination. The lullaby softened. The child's breathing slowed. The water moved again. Not forward. Not back. But inward, as if pulling toward something beneath the surface. The moon's reflection broke apart, stretching and bending across the ripples. The river seemed deeper than before, darker. The mother's voice faltered for just a moment. She felt a chill crawl along her arms. Her skin tightened, and her heart began to beat faster. Still, there was no sound of danger. No sudden splash. No rising waves. Only a heavy stillness that followed the song. When the lullaby ended, the river did not return to normal. The air remained thick. The insects did not return. The water lay quiet, too quiet, like a held breath. The mother stood quickly, her child asleep in her arms. She did not look back as she walked home, but she could feel the river behind her, waiting. That night, sleep did not come easily. She dreamed of water and voices she could not understand. When she woke before dawn, her chest felt tight, as if something unseen had pressed against her in the dark. By morning, the river looked the same as it always had. And yet, the town felt different. Something had listened. The town had always lived with its past just beneath the surface, like roots under dry soil. People went about their days as if nothing weighed on them, but the weight was there. It showed in the way elders paused before answering certain questions, and in how mothers held their children closer when they passed the river. Long ago, before the houses grew tired and the paths wore thin, the river had been loved without fear. Families gathered along its banks. Children played in the shallow water while women washed clothes and sang. The river was a place of life, not caution. Then something happened. No one spoke of it clearly anymore. The story had been broken into pieces and scattered through time. Some said it began with a storm that came too fast. Others whispered of mistakes made in the dark. What remained was not the truth, but the shape of it, sharp, painful, and incomplete. There had been mothers. There had been children. And there had been the river. On one terrible night, the river rose when it should not have. The water moved with force, not rage, but purpose. By morning, the town had lost more than it could name. Grief fell like ash, settling into every home. People cried openly at first, calling out names that would never answer. Then silence came. Silence was not chosen because it was right. It was chosen because it was easier. The town was poor. Life was already hard. Carrying truth felt heavier than burying it. So the elders spoke carefully, and the stories were softened, reshaped, made safer for memory. Children grew up hearing warnings instead of reasons. Respect the river. Do not ask why. Fear replaced understanding. The lullaby survived this time, passed quietly from mother to daughter. It was sung behind closed doors, late at night, when grief returned uninvited. It became a private comfort, never meant for the river again. Over time, its origin faded. Only the feeling remained. Unresolved grief changed the town. Traditions became strict. Questions became dangerous. The river became something watched rather than known. People learned to live beside it without truly seeing it. Now, as days passed after the mother's song, old unease returned. An elder dreamed of water pressing against his chest. A fisherman remembered a night from his childhood he had sworn to forget. A woman found herself humming a tune she had not sung in years, her throat tightening without knowing why. The past was no longer quiet. The river carried it all, every tear, every name left unspoken. It had not demanded answers before. It had waited. Time meant nothing to it. What mattered was memory, and memory had been denied. The town had believed forgetting was the same as healing. They were wrong. As whispers began to move through the streets, people avoided each other's eyes. No one wanted to be the first to speak. Truth, once buried, becomes dangerous when it starts to rise. And beneath the river's dark surface, the sorrow of generations pressed upward, no longer willing to remain hidden. The river began to change in small ways at first, so small that most people tried to ignore them. One morning, the water reached higher onto the banks, though there had been no rain for days. The soil was dry, the sky clear, yet the river crept outward as if stretching its limbs after a long sleep. Fishermen were the first to notice. Nets came back heavier, tangled in weeds that should not have been there. Fish behaved strangely, gathering in places they once avoided, then vanishing without warning. Some men said the water felt colder when they touched it, even under the sun. At night, the river made sounds it had not made before. Not loud splashes or crashing waves, but soft whispers, like breath moving through reeds. Those who lived closest shut their windows and told themselves it was only the wind. But the wind did not explain why dogs refused to go near the banks, or why birds stopped settling in the trees that leaned over the water. Fear spread quietly. Some townspeople turned to superstition. They left small offerings near the river, hoping to calm it. Others laughed at them, calling it foolishness. A few insisted nothing was wrong at all. The river had always changed, they said. People were simply remembering old fears. The mother noticed everything. Each sign felt personal, as if the river were answering her directly. Every time she passed near it, her chest tightened. She remembered the night she had sung and the stillness that followed. The memory returned again and again, refusing to fade. She told herself she was imagining the connection. Love makes people blame themselves, she thought. Mothers always fear they have done something wrong. Still, guilt settled deep inside her, growing heavier with each change in the water. Her child slept poorly now, stirring at night, fingers curling into her clothing. When the mother sang the lullaby, she hesitated, her voice softer, unsure. The song that once brought comfort now carried a weight she could not ignore. The river was no longer just there. It was reacting. One afternoon, without warning, water spilled into a nearby path, flooding it ankle-deep before slowly pulling back again. People gathered, speaking in hushed tones. No damage was done, but the message was clear. The river could reach them if it chose to. That night, the mother stood at her doorway, listening to the distant flow. She felt a pull she could not explain, a call that did not use words. It was not anger she sensed, but pressure, like a truth pushing against a closed mouth. She pressed her hand against her chest, her breath shallow. Love for her child burned fiercely, mixed now with fear. If the lullaby had stirred the river, what would happen if she sang again? And what would happen if she stayed silent? The town waited, tense and uneasy, unsure whether to prepare for disaster or pretend nothing was happening. But the river did not retreat. It had been awakened, not by noise or carelessness, but by feeling. By a song filled with love and sorrow. And once stirred, it could not return to sleep without being answered. Something had been set in motion. And the cost of silence was beginning to show. The truth did not come to the mother all at once. It arrived slowly, in pieces, carried by whispers, memories, and the heavy looks of those who had lived too long with silence. It began with an old woman who lived near the market, a woman whose back was bent by age and whose eyes had seen more than they wished to remember. The mother noticed her watching one evening as she passed by with her child. There was recognition in that gaze, and fear. Later that night, the old woman came to her door. She did not speak at first. She only listened as the mother sang the lullaby to calm her restless child. When the song ended, the old woman's hands trembled. Tears filled her eyes, though she tried to hide them. That was when the mother knew the lullaby was not just hers. The old woman spoke carefully, choosing each word as if stepping across broken ground. Long ago, she said, there were many mothers like her, young, tired, and afraid. They lived beside the river when it was still trusted. When tragedy came, it came quickly. Children were taken by sudden floods, by accidents that should not have happened, by moments no one could undo. The mothers gathered in grief. They sang because they had nothing else. They sang to survive the nights when guilt and sorrow crushed their chests. The lullaby was born there, not as comfort for children, but as a way to hold pain together, so it would not tear them apart. The river heard it. Not the sound, but the sorrow. The lullaby became a thread, binding grief to the water. Every time it was sung with true pain, the river remembered. And every time the town chose silence instead of truth, that memory grew heavier. The mother felt her breath shake as she listened. The song she had used to protect her child was never meant to be sung near the river again. It was meant to stay hidden, private, carried gently through generations without being fully understood. By singing it beside the water, she had reopened something unfinished. The old woman did not accuse her. There was no anger in her voice. Only exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying truth alone for too long. The mother's heart broke open. She thought of her child, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the weight carried in that simple melody. Love had guided her actions, but love without understanding had consequences. She had not meant to cause harm. She had only wanted rest, safety, peace. Instead, she had awakened memory. That night, the mother sat alone after her child slept. She did not sing. She listened. The river sounded different now, not louder, but closer. As if it were leaning toward her, waiting. She realized then that the river was not punishing them. It was responding. Responding to grief left unspoken, to truth buried under fear. It carried sorrow not because it wanted to, but because it had been given no choice. The lullaby was not dangerous because it was powerful. It was dangerous because it was honest. The mother pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the ache of generations before her. She understood now that love alone could not protect her child from a past that refused to stay buried. Avoidance had only delayed this moment. She had awakened something old, not with carelessness, but with love mixed with sorrow. And love, she was beginning to understand, must face truth to heal. The river did not need silence anymore. It needed acknowledgment. As dawn approached, the mother watched the water from her doorway. Fear still lived in her, but something else had joined it, resolve. She did not yet know what the river wanted, or what it would take to calm it. But she knew one thing with certainty. The lullaby could never be the same again. The river did not speak in words, yet its message grew clearer with each passing day. It was not rage that moved the water, nor hunger for destruction. It was pressure, the kind that builds when something has been held down for too long. The mother felt it most strongly. When she walked near the river now, her chest tightened, not with fear alone, but with understanding. The water no longer felt distant or wild. It felt aware. Present. Like a witness that had waited patiently while generations turned their faces away. The river wanted recognition. Not offerings placed in secret. Not whispered prayers meant to calm fear. It wanted the truth spoken aloud. It wanted the grief that had been buried to be seen, named, and carried together instead of alone. At night, the mother lay awake, listening. The river's flow changed with her thoughts, swelling when guilt rose, settling when resolve steadied her breath. She realized then that the river responded not to sound, but to honesty. To emotion unmasked. Still, fear clung to her like a shadow. Her child slept beside her, small and trusting. Each breath was a reminder of what was at risk. The mother's love burned fiercely, fighting against the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. What if the river demanded too much? What if facing the truth brought harm instead of peace? The town began to feel the same pull. Meetings formed without being called. People gathered in small groups, speaking in half-sentences, testing how much could be said without breaking the fragile balance they had lived under for years. Some insisted the past should remain buried. Others, tired of fear, argued that silence had already cost too much. The river answered both sides. When denial grew loud, the water swelled. When someone spoke honestly, even briefly, the river eased. The pattern was impossible to ignore. The town stood at the edge of a choice it could no longer delay. The mother understood her place in this reckoning. The lullaby had opened the door, but she alone could not close it. What was needed now was not another song, but courage. The courage to admit what had been lost. The courage to face guilt without excuses. The courage to let grief breathe. Yet courage is never simple when love is involved. The mother feared that acknowledgment would invite punishment. That by speaking, she might place her child in danger. She wrestled with this fear in silence, her heart torn between protection and responsibility. One evening, she stood at the river's edge again, holding her child close. The water was restless, dark under the fading light. She felt the pull strongly now, not like a threat, but like a hand reaching out, asking to be held instead of avoided. She realized something then. The river did not want to take. It wanted to release. Release the grief it had carried. Release the sorrow passed down like a curse. Release the truth that had been locked away in fear. But release required acknowledgment. It required someone willing to stand between love and truth and refuse to choose silence. The town waited, watching her without knowing why. They sensed that whatever came next would change everything. That the river would not retreat on its own. The mother looked down at her child, at the life she was trying to protect. She understood that protection built on denial was fragile. That safety bought with silence would not last. The river surged gently, as if urging her forward. It did not demand sacrifice. It demanded honesty. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, the mother stepped back from the water. Her heart still shook, but her resolve began to form. She knew now what the river wanted, even if she did not yet know how to give it. The time for silence was ending. And soon, she would have to choose what kind of mother, and what kind of person, she was willing to be. The mother had spent her life believing that protection meant keeping danger away. Keeping questions quiet. Keeping the past buried. Now she understood how fragile that belief had been. Silence had not erased pain. It had only passed it forward. Each day, the river pressed closer, not in distance, but in presence. The water seemed heavier, fuller, as if holding more than it could contain. The town felt it too. Conversations grew shorter. Sleep grew restless. Children asked questions adults struggled to answer. The mother stood in the center of it all, carrying a choice that felt too large for one person. If she stayed silent, her child might remain safe for now. The river might settle slowly, dulled by time, as it had before. But the sorrow would remain, waiting for another voice, another generation, another moment of weakness. If she spoke, if she sang again with truth instead of fear, she risked everything. She risked anger, blame, loss. She risked being remembered as the one who broke the town's fragile peace. At night, she sat beside her sleeping child and thought of the mothers who came before her. Women who had loved just as fiercely, who had also tried to protect, and who had chosen silence because they saw no other way. She did not judge them. She understood them. But understanding did not mean repeating their choice. The lullaby lived inside her like a breath. She knew now it could not remain the same. It could no longer carry only sorrow. It needed to carry truth. Acceptance. Acknowledgment of what had been lost, without trying to hide from it. This was not about pleasing the river. It was about breaking a cycle. The mother realized that real protection was not found in hiding pain from her child, but in showing how to face it. Healing did not come from pretending nothing was wrong. It came from courage, from standing still in the presence of fear and refusing to look away. Her role was changing. She was no longer only a shield. She was becoming a bridge, between past and present, between grief and release. That realization frightened her, but it also gave her strength. As the night deepened, the river grew louder. Not violent, but restless. The town gathered at a distance, drawn by instinct. No one spoke. They sensed that something was about to be decided, that a line long avoided was about to be crossed. The mother walked toward the river, her child safe in another's arms. Each step felt heavy, yet clear. The water shimmered under the moon, rising and falling as if breathing with her. She stopped at the edge and closed her eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel everything, the love, the fear, the guilt, the grief inherited from voices long gone. Tears fell freely. She did not wipe them away. She understood now that the lullaby did not need to disappear. It needed to change. The song must no longer ask the river to hold sorrow alone. It must speak the truth aloud. It must acknowledge what was lost and promise that it would not be forgotten again. As the town watched in silence, the mother opened her mouth, ready to sing, not as a desperate act, but as a deliberate choice. The air grew still. The river waited. And with that breath before the song, the weight of generations rested on her shoulders. End of section 8, leads into section 9, the night of reckoning. When you're ready, say, next, and I'll continue. 9. The night of reckoning. The river changed as night fully settled. Its surface darkened, reflecting no stars, no moon, only depth. The air felt charged, as if the world itself had leaned closer to listen. People gathered along the banks at a careful distance, their faces pale, their breaths shallow. No one spoke. Words felt too small for what was unfolding. The mother stood alone at the edge. She did not feel fearless. Her hands trembled. Her heart raced. But beneath the fear, there was clarity. For the first time since the river began to stir, she was not reacting. She was choosing. The water swelled, rising higher than it should, curling against the bank with slow strength. It was not violent, but it was powerful, like a memory that refuses to be pushed back down. The town watched as the river claimed space, reminding them that avoidance had never been control. The mother inhaled deeply. She began to sing. The melody was familiar, but the feeling was not. This time, the lullaby did not carry denial. It carried truth. Her voice shook at first, then steadied as she let the grief speak instead of hiding it. She sang for the mothers who had lost children and were never allowed to mourn openly. She sang for the children whose names had faded into whispers. She sang for herself, for the fear she had carried, for the love that had led her here. The river responded immediately. The water surged forward, higher, stronger, pressing against the earth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some stepped back. Others fell to their knees. Old memories rushed through the town like a flood, faces, cries, nights spent pretending nothing was wrong. The mother did not stop. Tears streamed down her face as she sang of loss without excuses. Of mistakes without blame. Of grief that deserved light, not burial. Her voice rose and fell with the water, not fighting it, but moving with it. The river roared, not with anger, but with release. For a moment, it felt as if everything might break. The banks trembled. The water reached farther than ever before. Fear tightened its grip on every heart watching. Then, slowly, the tide turned. The river began to pull back. The force softened. The roar faded into a deep, steady flow. The water lowered, retreating from the edge it had claimed. The air lightened, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. The mother's voice weakened, then stopped. Silence fell, not the heavy silence of denial, but a quiet filled with understanding. The river settled into its bed, moving calmly once more. It did not return to how it had been before. It felt different. Lighter. People wept openly now. Some held each other. Others stared at the water, finally seeing it not as an enemy, but as a witness that had been forced to carry too much alone. The mother sank to her knees, exhausted. Her chest ached, but it was a clean pain, like a wound finally allowed to heal. She knew this moment did not erase the past. Nothing could. But it had changed its hold on the present. The town had faced what it had avoided for generations. The river had answered. As the crowd slowly dispersed, no one spoke of punishment or blame. There was only acknowledgment. Loss had been named. Grief had been shared. Silence had been broken. The night ended not with destruction, but with release. And those scars remained, on the land and in the hearts of the people. The cycle had finally been interrupted. The river flowed on, steady and quiet. The reckoning was over. But its meaning would last far longer than the night. The river changed as night fully settled. Its surface darkened, reflecting no stars, no moon, only depth. The air felt charged, as if the world itself had leaned closer to listen. People gathered along the banks at a careful distance, their faces pale, their breaths shallow. No one spoke. Words felt too small for what was unfolding. The mother stood alone at the edge. She did not feel fearless. Her hands trembled. Her heart raced. But beneath the fear, there was clarity. For the first time since the river began to stir, she was not reacting. She was choosing. The water swelled, rising higher than it should, curling against the bank with slow strength. It was not violent, but it was powerful, like a memory that refuses to be pushed back down. The town watched as the river claimed space, reminding them that avoidance had never been control. The mother inhaled deeply. She began to sing. The melody was familiar, but the feeling was not. This time, the lullaby did not carry denial. It carried truth. Her voice shook at first, then steadied as she let the grief speak instead of hiding it. She sang for the mothers who had lost children and were never allowed to mourn openly. She sang for the children whose names had faded into whispers. She sang for herself, for the fear she had carried, for the love that had led her here. The river responded immediately. The water surged forward, higher, stronger, pressing against the earth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some stepped back. Others fell to their knees. Old memories rushed through the town like a flood, faces, cries, nights spent pretending nothing was wrong. The mother did not stop. Tears streamed down her face as she sang of loss without excuses. Of mistakes without blame. Of grief that deserved light, not burial. Her voice rose and fell with the water, not fighting it, but moving with it. The river roared, not with anger, but with release. For a moment, it felt as if everything might break. The banks trembled. The water reached farther than ever before. Fear tightened its grip on every heart watching. Then, slowly, the tide turned. The river began to pull back. The force softened. The roar faded into a deep, steady flow. The water lowered, retreating from the edge it had claimed. The air lightened, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. The mother's voice weakened, then stopped. Silence fell, not the heavy silence of denial, but a quiet filled with understanding. The river settled into its bed, moving calmly once more. It did not return to how it had been before. It felt different. Lighter. People wept openly now. Some held each other. Others stared at the water, finally seeing it not as an enemy, but as a witness that had been forced to carry too much alone. The mother sank to her knees, exhausted. Her chest ached, but it was a clean pain, like a wound finally allowed to heal. She knew this moment did not erase the past. Nothing could. But it had changed its hold on the present. The town had faced what it had avoided for generations. The river had answered. As the crowd slowly dispersed, no one spoke of punishment or blame. There was only acknowledgment. Loss had been named. Grief had been shared. Silence had been broken. The night ended not with destruction, but with release. And those scars remained, on the land and in the hearts of the people. The cycle had finally been interrupted. The river flowed on, steady and quiet. The reckoning was over. But its meaning would last far longer than the night. Morning came gently, as if the night before had exhausted the world. The river lay calm under the early light, its surface smooth and untroubled. It looked the same as it always had, yet everyone who saw it knew something had changed. The water no longer felt heavy. The town moved slowly that day. People spoke in softer voices, not from fear, but from reflection. No one pretended the night had been a dream. The truth had been spoken too clearly for that. Loss had been acknowledged, and with it came a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Not everything could be returned. Some lives were gone forever. Some mistakes could never be undone. The river had taken much in the past, but it had not taken without reason. It had carried what the town refused to hold. Now that burden had been shared, and in sharing it, something precious had been given back. Understanding. Families gathered and spoke of things long avoided. Names were remembered. Stories were told without softening their edges. Tears came freely, without shame. Grief was no longer something to hide from children or neighbors. It became something to carry together. The mother felt the change deeply. Her body was tired, but her heart felt lighter. When she held her child, there was no longer fear hiding behind love. She knew now that honesty was a stronger shield than silence. Her child sensed the difference too, resting more easily, breathing calm and steady. The lullaby was not gone. But it was no longer the same. When the mother sang now, she did not sing to forget. She sang to remember. The melody carried acknowledgment, not sorrow alone. It honored what had been lost without asking the river to bear it again. The river accepted this. It flowed peacefully, no longer pushing against its banks, no longer whispering at night. It had released what it carried because it had finally been heard. Memory no longer needed to demand attention. It had been given space. The town began to change in small but important ways. Children were taught not just to respect the river, but to understand it. Elders spoke openly of the past, not to frighten, but to teach. Fear slowly gave way to responsibility. The mother stood once more at the river's edge, watching sunlight dance across the water. She did not feel watched anymore. She felt seen. She knew the debt had not been paid with punishment or sacrifice. It had been paid with truth. With courage. With the willingness to face pain instead of passing it on. What was taken could never be fully returned. But what was given back, peace, honesty, and shared grief, was enough to allow life to continue without fear. The river flowed on. And this time, it carried only what it chose to carry. Life returned to the town slowly, like dawn creeping over the river. The routines resumed, children ran along dusty paths, women gathered at the market, men tended their work, but everything carried a new weight, a quiet reflection that had not been there before. The night of reckoning had changed them all, though no one could name it completely. The lullaby, once a secret song sung in fear and sorrow, was different now. The mother no longer sang it to hide grief. She sang it to honor what had been lost, to acknowledge the truth that had been avoided for so long. It became a quiet reminder of courage and honesty rather than danger. Children learned the story in fragments, through gentle words and careful teaching. They understood that the river was not simply to be feared, but respected. That love and truth were stronger than silence. And in their games and laughter, the lessons of the past quietly endured. The mother found peace, though it was not perfect. Pain had not vanished, and some nights still brought memories that pressed on her heart. But she understood now that peace did not mean forgetting. It meant carrying the past with honesty, allowing it to shape, not destroy, the present. The town's elders, once the keepers of fear and secrets, began speaking openly of what had happened. Conversations about loss, grief, and responsibility were no longer hushed. The community had learned that acknowledgment could heal, that sharing sorrow lightened the burden. The river, too, had changed. Its currents were gentle, its whispers calm. It no longer moved unnaturally, no longer held the heavy weight of unspoken truths. It flowed with the rhythm of a community willing to face itself, and its presence became a source of quiet respect rather than fear. The mother watched her child grow, noticing how each day brought curiosity and courage. Her love was no longer protective in the sense of shielding from all danger. It was protective in teaching, guiding, and sharing truths, even when they were difficult. Some nights, she sang the lullaby softly, letting it float across the water. It was no longer a call that could awaken hidden sorrow. It was a song that acknowledged history, offered love, and embraced hope. In the quiet moments after, when the town slept and the river moved gently under the moonlight, she felt a sense of continuity. Grief and courage intertwined. Loss and love coexisted. And life, imperfect but resilient, continued. The song had changed. The town had changed. And the mother, through her courage, had found a place in a world where truth, love, and remembrance could live together. The river lay calm, ancient as always, its waters reflecting the golden light of morning. To any casual observer, nothing had changed. Yet those who lived by its banks knew the truth, it remembered everything. Not just sorrow, but courage. Not just loss, but love. The child grew in this new world, learning to speak openly of the past, to honor memory without fear. Each step along the riverbank became a lesson in understanding, each ripple a reminder that the water was not an enemy, but a witness. The mother walked beside her child, guiding, teaching, and watching the bonds of trust and love grow. The lullaby, once a fragile song of hidden grief, had transformed. It carried acknowledgment, healing, and the quiet power of truth. Sung softly over the water, it became a symbol of what generations had endured, and of what could now be faced with courage. The town, too, moved forward. Conversations that had been avoided for decades now took place openly. Stories of past mistakes, losses, and grief were shared, not to blame, but to understand and connect. Life did not forget the past, but it embraced it, allowing the lessons to shape a stronger, more compassionate community. The river, as always, watched. But its presence was no longer heavy with unanswered sorrow. It flowed with the grace of one who has been heard, carrying memory and love together in harmony. The ancient water held both pain and courage, proof that even nature remembers what humans often try to hide. The mother often stood silently at the edge, feeling the weight of generations behind her and the promise of life ahead. She knew the river could never forget, but she also knew that love, when spoken honestly, could heal even what memory held most tightly. Her child's laughter mingled with the water's gentle song, a reminder that hope could coexist with loss. The river had been awakened, not to punish, but to witness. And now, as the sun rose higher, it seemed to smile in its own way, reflecting light across the town, across the lives it had silently held. The past was remembered. The present was honored. And the future was open. In this quiet moment, the mother understood, love, when honest and brave, could heal even what nature remembers. The river's song would continue, but it would no longer carry only sorrow. It carried now a testament to courage, acknowledgment, and the enduring strength of the human heart. And so the river flowed, forever remembering love.